Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to take a look at a few aspects of ecosystems. So we're going to start with something called ecological succession. So with ecological succession, it's the formation of a community part of an ecosystem. And what we're going to take a look at is something called primary succession. There's actually two types, primary and secondary succession. In both cases, it's a series of predictable steps on how a community is actually going to form. But we're going to focus on primary succession. So here with primary succession, if we take a look at what it is, it's the development of a community in an area that has never had life before. One of the examples that comes to mind is the Hawaiian Islands. If you look at the Hawaiian Islands right now, there's tons and tons of life on the island, plant and animal. But all of those Hawaiian Islands started off as bare volcanic rock. Basically, eruptions under the ocean cause lava, magma to build up to actually form the islands. So when they broke through the surface and when they're on the surface, there's nothing but bare volcanic rock. But if you look at them today, they're teeming with life. There's so many plants, so many animals there. So how did that happen? How did you go from bare rock, no life, to tons and tons of life that we see today? Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at with primary succession. So scientists had an idea of how this happened. They believe that the first organisms to arrive in primary succession are these tiny little things called lichens. Now, if you've ever gone hiking before and you've seen like these scab-looking things on the rock, that's what lichens are. So these scab-looking things on the rock are called lichens. They're these tiny little organisms, and what they do is when they land on the rock, they basically start to break it down. As they break it apart and as they die, they build up soil. So you start with bare volcanic rock, these lichens come, they start to break apart the rock and die, and they form soil. Well, now that you have soil, now you have something for grasses to grow in. Grasses don't need a lot of soil. So any seeds floating around in the atmosphere, they come down, land on the newly formed soil, and they can actually grow in the little bit of soil that is there. Well, as grasses die and lichens continue to break apart the rock, you build up more soil, and now you have a little bit bigger plants called shrubs. So shrubs are tiny little bushes that we see here that need a little bit more soil than the grasses do. Well, as they die, they break down, adds more to the soil. Eventually, you have enough soil for things like trees to grow. So in primary ecological succession here, we're looking at how plants actually develop into an area. And if you think about it, you can understand why we would focus on plants in primary succession. Because if you think about it, when it comes to energy, when it comes to the carbon cycle, when it comes to the nitrogen cycle, or even when it comes to the water cycle, you need plants to bring carbon in, to absorb nitrogen from the soil. So without plants, you can't have animal, insects, bacteria, and stuff like that. Well, you can't have bacteria, but animals and insects wouldn't be able to live in that area. So this was an idea that scientists have. This is how they believed it formed, and they actually got to see it happen when an island formed off the coast of Iceland in 1963. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So in 1963, an island formed off the coast of Iceland, and it was called Xerxe. This island formed in a matter of days, and it continued erupting and growing until about 1967. But the way it was discovered, there was a boat of fishermen, and they saw smoke rising up into the air, and they thought it was a ship on fire, so they went to go help. But when they got there, they saw this. They saw huge eruptions happening and an actual island forming out in the middle of the ocean. Now, this was a good opportunity for scientists, and they use this as a model of ecological succession. So we start here with nothing but black volcanic rock. So there's no life here. So scientists watched it over the years, and here's a picture of Xerxe a little bit later. And what you can notice here are some green patches. After the lichens arrived, they saw lichens break down the rock, and once they started to break down the rock and form soil, grasses started to grow. After the grasses started to grow, here's how Xerxe looks now. So you can see little grasses and shrub. A lot of the island is actually underwater, but the part that is above water, you can see the shrubs actually growing now. So far it's been what scientists have predicted of how ecological succession occurs. So if this island actually continues and it remains above water, the next step would actually be trees. So that is ecological succession. So starting with no life and going through a series of steps to form the community. Now in 2004, scientists found the first animal to actually make it an official home, and that was a puffin, where the puffins actually had made a nest, and they found that nest in about 2004. So animals have actually arrived in the area. But again, just like I said earlier, the plants have to be established first before animals can actually arrive and use that area for living. All right, so a quick review back to what an ecosystem is, because in the next couple slides we'll be talking about abiotic factors. So ecosystem is all of the living and non-living in an area. So ecological succession talked about the biotic, the living parts of the ecosystem. Now we're going to take a look at the abiotic. All right, so we've talked about abiotic factors before, and what we talked about was like the rocks, the water, the soil, sunlight. Here's an additional 2 abiotic factors. So we have climate and weather. So with climate, it encompasses temperature, rainfall, humidity, and climate and weather are very similar to each other, but the big difference is climate is the year-to-year conditions, as where weather is the day-to-day conditions. Climate is predictable, while weather, as you know by watching the news, is often unpredictable. Sometimes we think we know what's going to happen with weather, and something completely opposite can happen. So with climate, year-to-year conditions, you can predict it. For example, here in Southern California, we know that every summer, usually in August, we are going to get temperatures that are probably going to be over 100 degrees. How many days in a row, all that stuff we might not be able to predict, but we know what the temperature is going to be like. Same thing, we could predict our winter, we can predict our autumn, we could predict our spring. Weather, just the day-to-day conditions. So if you're going to go outside right now and look up and see how what the weather is like, you could say it's sunny, it's cloudy, stuff like that. So that's the difference between climate and weather. All right, humans often use different parts of the ecosystem as resources. So here we're looking at renewable and non-renewable resources. With renewable resources, we're looking at things that we use, that human beings use, that can be regrown, regenerated, or replenished very easily, such as trees. If we cut down trees, we can plant new trees, give them time to grow before we cut those down and use those again. Fresh water, okay, the water cycle is going to clean the water, so trees, fresh water are examples of renewable resources. And also with renewable resources, you can use them more than once. Okay, that's a really important part. You can use the products that you make from trees usually over and over and over again. You can use water over and over and over again. Non-renewable resources, on the other hand, they can't be renewed, regenerated, regrown very quickly. In fact, it might take even millions of years for these resources to come back. So one of our prime examples is fossil fuels. It takes millions of years for fossil fuels to be created, and once they are used up, they are gone. So when you use a fossil fuel, when you put gas in your car and you burn it for combustion to get your car to go, that's it. It's gone. It's used up. So once you use it up, there's no reusing it again and again, like the renewable resources were. All right, so that's it for video number 2. Go ahead and take a look at video number 3.